Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right in today to unpack one of the most famous, fascinating, and honestly, thoroughly countercultural texts in ancient literature. We're talking about Matthew 5, which you probably know as the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Now, whether you approach this text from a theological angle, a historical one, or you're just a student of philosophy, Matthew 5 is absolutely foundational. I mean, even if you've never stepped foot inside a church, your baseline cultural understanding of right and wrong was very likely shaped by this exact text. It literally revolutionized Western ethics. How? Well, by taking a massive hammer to the established norms of its day. Instead of just focusing on external rule following, this text takes the ethical spotlight and shines it directly on our internal motivations. It's an incredibly demanding framework that completely redefined what it actually meant to live a good life.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with the upside-down kingdom, move into salt and light, talk about fulfilling the law, explore matters of the heart, and then finish up with radical love and responses.
Section 1. The Upside-Down Kingdom, or the Paradox of the Beatitudes. To really grasp this opening section, we have to recognize that it is a total subversion of ancient expectations. Back in the ancient world, divine favor and blessing were pretty much always linked to wealth, power, military might, and high social status. So when the text opens up with this striking paradox, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," it's a massive shock to the system. Imagine hearing this in a culture that absolutely venerated dominance. There's no way you wouldn't do a double take. It immediately hooks you by celebrating spiritual poverty, humility, and a lack of self-sufficiency. Right out of the gate, it establishes that this kingdom operates on a completely different currency than any earthly empire. Now, what's really interesting here is how the text continues to elevate the very people society typically pities or just straight up marginalizes. The blessings are poured out on the unlikely. We're talking about those who mourn, the meek, people hungering and thirsting for righteousness, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers. It even goes so far as to claim that those who are insulted and persecuted are actually the ones who should rejoice. Why? Because their reward is great. It completely overrides traditional markers of success, lifting up the weak and the persecuted over the traditionally powerful.
Section 2. Salt and light. The call to outward visibility.
So after establishing who is blessed, the narrative does a bit of a pivot. It moves from the identity of these citizens to their actual function. It's basically asking, okay, if you live by this upside-down ethic, what exactly is your role in the world? And the text answers this with two brilliant everyday metaphors: salt and light. First, you are the salt of the earth. In the ancient world, salt wasn't just something you sprinkled on your fries. It was an absolutely crucial preservative that stopped decay and added immense value. But there is a warning attached. If salt loses its saltiness, it's totally useless and gets thrown out. Then the metaphor shifts to the light of the world. Light is all about external visibility and guidance. The text makes the very logical point that you don't light a lamp just to hide it under a bowl, right? No, you put it on a stand. In that exact same way, the good deeds of this new community are meant to be entirely visible, standing out like a shining town built on a hill, ultimately pointing to and glorifying God rather than the individual.
Section 3. Fulfilling the law, which is all about raising the standard.
To understand this next part, we've got to remember that the original audience lived under a very strict external framework of Jewish law. The transition introduced here is a massive shift away from that old external compliance to a far stricter internal standard. Jesus explicitly says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Now, that word fulfill is absolutely critical. It means bringing the law to its intended ultimate completion. He isn't just throwing out the old rulebook. Actually, it's quite the opposite. He's requiring a level of righteousness that drastically surpasses that of the Pharisees, who were the strictest religious scholars of the day. Just look at the intense reverence for the existing law expressed right here. Until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law. The text makes it crystal clear that anyone who sets aside even the smallest of these commands will be called least, but whoever practices and teaches them will be great. So the standard isn't being lowered, it is being elevated to such a high degree that mere behavioral compliance just isn't going to cut it anymore.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. Matters of the heart, action versus intention.
Here is where the framework gets highly specific. We get a series of rapid-fire comparisons that are often called the antitheses. Jesus repeatedly uses this specific formula. You have heard that it was said, but I tell you.
He's deliberately contrasting external legal compliance with internal moral purity. First up on the chopping block is the law against murder. The old standard was super straightforward. You shall not murder. It regulated the physical action. But the new standard? It radically changes the game. It says that anyone who is simply angry with a brother or sister or speaks to them with contempt, like calling them a fool, is subject to judgment, even the fire of hell. Avoiding physical murder is no longer the finish line. This new ethic criminalizes the internal root of the action itself, which is unresolved anger and contempt.
The text vividly illustrates just how seriously this internal ethic has to be taken with a three-part reconciliation process. Think about this. If you're at the altar offering a gift to God, and you suddenly remember a conflict with someone, you are instructed to 1. Leave the gift. 2. Go and be reconciled. And only then, step 3, come back and offer your gift. To a first-century listener, this would have been mind-blowing. Literally dropping a sacred offering right at the holy temple altar just to go fix a personal squabble? It highlights the absolute priority of internal peace. Making peace with your human adversaries is presented as a strict prerequisite to your religious devotion. This matters of the heart theme is then applied to another very intense area of human life. The old standard prohibited the physical act of adultery, but the new standard declares that merely looking at someone with lust is equivalent to committing adultery in the heart. The internal intention carries the exact same moral weight as the external act. And the text follows this up with some pretty extreme metaphorical advice. If your right eye or right hand causes you to stumble, gouge it out or cut it off, because it's better to lose a part of your body than for your whole self to be destroyed. Obviously, it's figurative, but it demands drastic, uncompromising self-correction. Next up, the text takes on the cultural norms around divorce. The old standard allowed a man to divorce his wife pretty easily, provided he handled the paperwork, basically just giving her a certificate of divorce. The new standard severely restricts those legal loopholes. By limiting acceptable divorce strictly to cases of sexual immorality, this teaching was highly protective of the marriage bond. And really significantly for that historical context, it protected women from just being discarded for trivial reasons, which was a very common and dangerous vulnerability for them at the time. So moving on to the practice of taking oaths. The old standard warned against breaking oaths made to the Lord. The new standard entirely sweeps away the complex hierarchy they had of swearing by heaven or earth or Jerusalem. So the crucial point is this: your basic words should be entirely trustworthy. All you need to say is simply yes or no. The implication here is both brilliant and incredibly practical. Basically, if you have to swear a massive oath just to prove you're telling the truth, well, your everyday character is already compromised. And that brings us to Section 5, Radical Love and Responses, or what we could really call the ultimate ethical challenge. If you thought the previous sections were challenging, buckle up, because this final section of Matthew 5 is the most demanding of all. Here, traditional, deeply ingrained human concepts of fairness and justice are just completely upended in favor of a shocking, almost unreasonable level of generosity and grace. The ancient law of retribution was eye for eye and tooth for tooth. Now, historically, this was actually meant to limit vengeance, to make sure the punishment fit the crime and didn't just escalate out of control. But the new standard presented here? It completely abandons retribution altogether. It famously commands, do not resist an evil person. If slapped on the right cheek, you're told to turn the other cheek as well. It takes measured, legally justified retaliation and replaces it with radical non-resistance and vulnerability. And it doesn't stop at non-resistance. The text expands this into active, radical generosity. If someone sues you for your shirt, hand over your coat too. If a Roman soldier, who, remember, represents an occupying enemy force, forces you to carry his gear for 1 mile, voluntarily carry it for 2. And by the way, yes, this right here is the exact historical origin of the phrase going the extra mile. Give to anyone who asks, and don't turn away borrowers. All of these examples demand a proactive, overwhelming response of giving that goes far, far beyond what is legally or culturally required of anyone.
Everything we've talked about builds to the absolute peak of this paradoxical narrative. The old cultural understanding was simple: love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Makes sense, right? But the new standard shatters this. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And the rationale provided is profound. God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous equally. The text points out that, look, even corrupt tax collectors and pagans love people who love them back. Anybody can do that. The true mark of this new kingdom ethic is extending love to those who actively wish you harm.
Matthew 5 concludes with an impossibly high summary mandate. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, before that word perfect completely alienates you, it really helps to know that the original Greek word used here is teleos. That word implies being complete, whole, or mature in love, rather than just flawlessly never making a mistake. Still, it frames everything we've discussed, the internal purity, the radical generosity, the love for enemies, as an effort to literally mirror divine completion, rather than merely complying with a set of human laws.
And that brings us to the ultimate question left echoing at the end of this chapter. Is it truly possible to love an enemy? Is this upside-down, radically demanding framework meant to be a practical, everyday guide for how we actually navigate life? Or is it more of an aspirational mirror designed to reveal our flaws and show us just how far we fall short of divine perfection? Matthew 5 certainly doesn't offer easy answers, but it absolutely forces us to confront our deepest motivations. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what it means to truly live well.